faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll interpret this book called The Editor of Genius. The subtitle is Max Perkins and a Literary Era. You might not have heard of Max Perkins, but the big-name writers he discovered during his 33-year editing career are all household names. He spotted the talents of Fitzgerald and Hemingway when they were still unknowns, shaping literary classics like The Great Gatsby and The Sun Also Rises. He supported writers through their writing struggles and was called Our Common Father by Fitzgerald. Hemingway also dedicated The Old Man and the Sea to him, and Thomas Wolfe, hailed as the most talented American novelist of his time, saw Perkins as his discoverer. In short, Perkins was the unsung hero behind America's golden age of literature in the first half of the 20th century. Now, the editor of Genius we're discussing today is Perkins' biography. Its author, Scott Berg, a Pulitzer Prize winner, recreates the anecdotes and secrets of Perkins' collaborations with Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and others. The book won the National Book Award after publication and was adapted into the film Genius in 2016, starring big names like Colin Firth, Jude Law, and Nicole Kidman. So, how did Perkins discover these geniuses and help them finish their masterpieces? What made him exceptional as an editor? Let's now dive into the story of editor Perkins. Max Perkins was born in 1884 in Manhattan, New York, into a prominent family. Both his grandfather and father graduated from Harvard University. His grandfather was America's first art critic. His father was a lawyer, and his grandfather served as U.S. Secretary of State and a federal senator. As a kid, Perkins's father often read literary works to him and his siblings, sparking his lifelong love for literature. Later, Perkins also attended Harvard, where he edited the campus literary magazine. After college, driven by his passion for literature, Perkins worked as a reporter for the New York Times for a few years, but he grew weary of journalism's erratic hours. And so in 1910, at age 26, he switched to Scribner's Publishing House in New York, starting as an advertising and marketing manager for 4.5 years before moving to the editorial department at 30. When Perkins was a book editor, Scribner's Publishing House was a reputable but conservative publisher, strictly adhering to proper and decent tastes, mainly publishing works by long-established, traditional writers and rarely paying attention to young authors. The chief editor of the publishing house, Brownell, was an extremely prestigious American literary critic. He believed editors shouldn't modify works, meaning they only accepted mature, complete manuscripts that didn't require editorial creativity. So, Perkins and his colleagues' work was simple and tedious, more like proofreading, such as fixing grammar errors in gardening books or compiling student readers. Perkins often felt stifled. He wanted to find someone who could express a new worldview at the turn of the century in fresh language. Meanwhile, the American literary scene was also showing new trends. The public book. With World War I ending in 1918, the U.S. economy boomed. The American dream took hold, and people passionately chased money, booze, and sex. But on the other hand, World War I also left indelible psychological scars. Reflected in literature, it became a lost, disillusioned, and decadent generation. A group of outstanding writers emerged, including Ernest Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald. In 1918, a messy manuscript landed on Perkins' desk. The author was 22-year-old Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald defined the Jazz Age, a name from his 1922 short story collection. The Jazz Age spanned from 1918 post-WW1 to 1929, before the economic crash. Hedonism flourished then, and women's liberation consciousness grew stronger. New women emerged, smoking, indulging in wild private lives, loving raucous parties. The Jazz Age was Fitzgerald's eternal theme. Daisy in The Great Gatsby embodies this, but in 1918, he was just a literature-obsessed kid. He'd attended Princeton, joined the Army during 101, was stationed in Kansas, and wrote passionately whenever possible. In spring 1918, fearing transfer to the overseas front, Fitzgerald handed his manuscript to Scribner's through a writer friend, Scribner's publishing house. The book was titled The Romantic Egotist. The manuscript was highly immature at best, a jumbled mix of short stories, poems, and essays, chronicling Fitzgerald's own coming of age in an unrestrained style. Over 3 months, the manuscript passed from editor to editor, with none approving, including the chief editor. Brownell declared the manuscript utterly unreadable. When the manuscript finally reached Perkins, unlike his colleagues, he saw authentic life in Fitzgerald's still unpolished prose. He believed the public would crave this book, but with no other supporters at the press, Perkins reluctantly sent a rejection letter, yet filled it with encouraging, substantive revision suggestions. His letter profoundly inspired Fitzgerald. 6 weeks later, Perkins received Fitzgerald's revised manuscript, delighted to find major improvements. But senior editors overruled him again. To get it published, Perkins even pitched the manuscript to 2 Scribner's competitors, but faced rejections there too. The repeated rejections crushed Fitzgerald's confidence. He was then dating Zelda, a beautiful but materialistic heiress who demanded he earn enough money before she'd marry him. So after leaving the Army, Fitzgerald took an advertising job in New York. With Scribner's nearby, he met Perkins, a meeting that changed his life. Perkins advised a full rewrite with concrete guidance, like switching from first person to third person for narrative distance. Fitzgerald embraced every suggestion and retitled the book This Side of Paradise. Meanwhile, within the press, Perkins kept advocating for Fitzgerald. At the editorial meeting, Perkins presented 2 arguments. First, a publisher's primary duty is to publish talented authors. Second, if Fitzgerald published elsewhere, young writers would follow him. Perkins even told the president, "If Scribner's rejects an author like Fitzgerald, I'll lose all interest in publishing." This time, Perkins prevailed, just as Fitzgerald hit rock bottom. Turns out, he hadn't made it big in New York, so he decided to give up proposing to Zelda, the wealthy heiress. Dejected, he returned to his hometown and took a temporary job at the train station. He was repairing a train car roof when he received the manuscript acceptance letter. Fitzgerald quit that same day, running through the streets, stopping acquaintances to announce his novel This Side of Paradise would be published. Living up to Perkins's faith. Published in 1920, it instantly became a bestseller that season and won critical acclaim. It's a semi-autobiographical novel. The protagonist, Amory, comes from aristocracy, smart and handsome, dreaming of climbing society's ladder to greatness. But at Princeton, he encountered real society and faced academic, romantic, and social setbacks that left him adrift. Just then, WW1 broke out. He left campus for the military. During the war, Amory's mother died and classmates perished in battle, repeated blows that transformed his worldview. He spiraled from hedonism to decadence and nihilism. Amory's story embodies that generation's shattered American dream. Critics declared it deservedly made the world notice a new generation. Back then, 5,000 copies sold for a debut novel was considered outstanding. But This Side of Paradise sold over 20,000 copies in its first week. Fitzgerald became an overnight sensation and married Zelda as he dreamed. After fame, Fitzgerald and Zelda lived extravagantly, spending lavishly. Though a star writer commanding high fees, sometimes $3,500 for a short story, their overspending often left them broke, forcing frequent advances of thousands in royalties from the publisher. Out of guilt and gratitude to Perkins, Fitzgerald often recommended rising literary stars, including Hemingway, 3 years his junior. In December 1924, Perkins first saw Hemingway's short story collection. At 27, Hemingway had been a poorly paid freelancer drifting through Europe. Perkins encountered prose unlike any before, stripped down yet powerful. He knew instinctively that Hemingway had a bright future, and immediately assured him, facts. No matter what you write, we'll publish it. Just like that, without even seeing the draft of The Sun Also Rises, Perkins signed the contract and paid Hemingway a $1,500 advance. In 1926, Perkins received Hemingway's manuscript. The book drew from Hemingway's own life as a journalist in Paris, depicting a group of men and women from America, Britain, and elsewhere. Their social and romantic lives in Paris and their experiences traveling to Spain. Many among them were spiritually disillusioned after WW1. Protagonist Jake lost his sexual ability in the war, preventing him from being with Lady Ashley, whom he loved. And Lady Ashley, with her countless affairs, represented the era's sexual liberation movement. The book's unique writing technique later became known as the iceberg theory. Using sparse words to depict character traits and actions, the written text being just the tip of the iceberg. The remaining story and emotions are left for readers to imagine. This writing style influenced future generations. Perkins was astounded when he read the manuscript. He said nobody else could write such a vibrant book, but he now faced a major challenge. The Sun Also Rises used profanity unacceptable then, like calling the heroine Lady Ashley a bitch. It mentioned bulls' genitals during Spanish bullfighting scenes. To the 72-year-old conservative chairman, Scribner, this was tarnishing the publishing house's reputation. To publish it, Perkins fought on two fronts, internally arguing the profanity didn't diminish its artistic value. Rejecting it over wording would brand the press as ultra-conservative. Meanwhile, he persuaded Hemingway that some readers fixate on certain words. Vulgar minds focused only on sexual references. It wasn't worth risking a ban or lawsuit over a few words. Even the stubborn Hemingway was convinced. Hemingway said, "You can imagine Perkins and I shared the same stance on language." So Hemingway spent a month removing words he thought expendable. But he insisted on keeping certain terms, just as Perkins predicted. After publication, outraged readers demanded apologies for vulgarity, and Boston banned the book.
Perkins responded,
A publisher's duty is to release works of high literary value that critique their era. The Sun Also Rises proved Perkins' vision right. It sold over 20,000 copies. The Lost Generation became an era-defining label. Accustomed reputation. After launching Fitzgerald and Hemingway, Perkins became the industry sage every new writer sought. He not only spotted talent but mentored authors, transforming raw manuscripts into polished works. Thomas Wolfe exemplified this more than Fitzgerald or Hemingway. Though less known in China, Wolfe's American literary stature rivals both. Nobel laureate William Faulkner called Wolfe perhaps the most talented contemporary novelist. Born in 1900 to a working-class North Carolina family, his father, a drunken tombstone carver, his mother a book saleswoman obsessed with property, amid constant fights and 8 children, Wolfe, the youngest, was kicked out to earn money as a teen. He sold papers, took odd jobs, observing society while struggling to survive.
But gifted since age 12. He wrote through it all, later attending Harvard.
Masterpieces like Look Homeward Angel and Of Time in the River drew from his life, chronicling a youth's anguished coming of age. Yet Wolfe's dense prose, poetic, sprawling sentences rich in detail but slow-paced, made his work challenging. These epic novels earned comparisons to Proust's In Search of Lost Time. In the fall of 1928, a literary agent delivered Wolfe's manuscript, O Lost, to Perkins. 13 centimeters thick and 330,000 words long. It chronicles the coming-of-age journey of Eugene Gant from birth to college. Eugene's prototype is Wolfe himself. Wolfe knew it was too long, but this book came from his life, capturing his 20-year-old worldview. Those emotional journeys demanded extensive passages. Perkins found brilliant sections immediately apparent. The author's talent was exceptional, but the core issue wasn't length. It was structural incoherence. Major surgery was required. For example, the first 100 pages covered Eugene's father's story, barely relevant to the main theme. Perkins wrote inviting Wolfe to New York. Rejected elsewhere, Wolfe replied, "Your praise fills me with hope. To me, it's like diamonds. In 1929, 45-year-old Perkins met 29-year-old Wolfe and signed a contract. He paid a $450 advance. Elated, Wolfe floated through New York, kissing the contract and check in crowded streets. But Perkins demanded 100,000 plus words cut and gave revision tips before sending him home. Weeks later, Wolfe returned triumphantly. Yet the book had only shrunk by 8 pages. He deleted content but added transitions for coherence, barely reducing word count. To Wolfe, each cut felt like slicing a wound, meeting stitches with new words. He lamented, "Cutting chunks makes my heart bleed." Understandable, since self-editing challenges any author. Especially for this autobiographical work, he couldn't treat his own life objectively. So Perkins had to work directly with Wolfe, establishing a collaborative model where Perkins proposed revisions. Wolfe would revise at his apartment, meeting after each chapter completion. Perkins maintained that Eugene's family relationships were the novel's absolute core. Any plot distracting from this central theme had to be cut. Take Eugene's Uncle Henry. His presence slowed pacing without advancing the plot. So, 4 manuscript pages about the uncle were reduced to a single line. Henry, the eldest, now 30. Throughout editing, Wolfe deeply admired Perkins' literary judgment and eagerly implemented his suggestions. The book was finally titled Look Homeward, Angel. It captured a generation's confusion during America's rapid industrialization and urbanization. Protagonist Eugene, born into dysfunction, was lonely and sensitive, yet intellectually gifted. His coming-of-age story, escaping family through studies, heartbreaks, and wandering, culminated with leaving for Harvard. Published September 1929, Look Homeward, Angel received acclaim, became a bestseller, and established Wolfe as a premier new talent. Ambitiously, Wolfe resolved to write a book capturing unspoken experiences every American shared, inspired by Perkins' remark during a walk. Every man searches for his father. Wolfe spent 4 agonizing years pouring his life into it. Perkins noticed Wolfe's manuscript ballooning uncontrollably. Crushing pressure made Wolfe increasingly anxious, insomniac and nightmare-plagued, until Perkins intervened to save him from being consumed. In late 1933, he summoned Wolfe home and declared it time to stop writing. The book was finished. Much later, Wolfe admitted Perkins' intuition had proven right yet again. Though not publishable or readable yet, the book's skeleton was complete. Perkins' decisive intervention helped Wolfe see the story's structure clearly. Wolfe himself said, "I was like a drowning man gasping for one last breath. Then suddenly my feet found solid ground again." This manuscript, over 1 million words, filled 3 large crates. Perkins spent 2 years editing it, the most grueling project of his career. Colleagues feared editing it might kill him. Perkins discovered it contained 2 separate stories. One was titled Of Time and the River, featuring Eugene Gant, protagonist of Look Homeward, Angel. Of Time and the River continued where Look Homeward, Angel ended, following Eugene's journey to Harvard and his nomadic, hunger-filled youth. Perkins proposed publishing Of Time and the River first. They worked late nights, Monday through Saturday. This time, Perkins didn't just restructure, he advised on scene details down to character dialogue. For instance, age that wealthy character to middle years, or add more dialogues with women between jealous frenzies. Wolfe fought desperately to keep his passages. Arguments permeated the entire revision. Each time Perkins slashed a full page, Wolfe's face twitched in agony, like flesh being cut. Their nightly grind became literary gossip. Critics even mocked rumors. Mr. Perkins wrestled Thomas Wolfe for 3 days just to delete one phrase. Ultimately, the manuscript was cut from over 1 million words to 450,000. In March 1935, Of Time and the River, published, spanning 912 pages. The book shook American publishing. Most reviews ranked Wolfe alongside giants like Dostoevsky. Despite the Great Depression's publishing slump, Of Time and the River hit top 3 on bestseller lists. Scribner's reprinted it 5 times within weeks, hitting 30,000 copies. Major U.S. media, like the New York Times, gave Wolfe full front-page coverage. His photo was everywhere.
Wolfe dedicated the book to Perkins.
He wrote, "A brilliant editor, a brave and honest man. He stood by the author through bitter, hopeless, and doubtful days, preventing despair. Without this dedication and care, the book wouldn't exist." So why was Perkins better at guiding authors than other editors? This skill stemmed first from his profound literary knowledge. When Wolfe's agent read the edited Look Homeward Angel, he dared ask Perkins a long, pondered question. "Why don't you write yourself? Your writing far surpasses most writers." Perkins stared at him a long while before replying. "Because I'm an editor, not just Wolfe's agent." Many writers believed Perkins had all the makings of a great author. He just never wrote. This writerly quality made him a natural editor. For instance, he truly understood authors and could outline entire novels, advising them on structure. Often, Perkins' advice proved crucial to a novel's success. He also excelled at spotting each author's unique gifts and tailoring writing advice. Perkins sent books to his authors like prescriptions, chosen for their tastes, to excite and inspire new directions. Shortly after Fitzgerald's debut, Perkins mailed him literary criticism on Mark Twain. After reading it, Fitzgerald said,
"It's one of the most inspiring books, like a breath of life."
He marked up entire passages and, influenced by it, wrote his famous short story, The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, a fantastical tale about wealth. Another success story, Miss Rawlings also found her writing style through Perkins' guidance. And Perkins knew Miss Rawlings needed specific advice, not generalities, so he often wrote long letters to Miss Rawlings, packed with detailed advice. For instance, while Miss Rawlings was writing The Yearling, Perkins sent her letters up to 1,800 words long. The book tells the story of a little boy named Jody. After his father kills a doe, Jody begs his parents to let him bring the fawn home, and they become inseparable friends. But as the deer grows, it eats crops by instinct, threatening the family's survival. Eventually, the parents shoot the deer, and Jody, heartbroken, runs away. After hardships, he returns home to shoulder life's burdens, ending his golden childhood. Published in 1938, The Yearling topped bestseller lists for 2 years, sold 500,000 copies, and won Miss Rawlings the Pulitzer Prize. The book was first introduced to China by the famous writer Eileen Chang, who translated it. She translated the title as Deer Park in Eternal Spring. Perkins's genius was that he could spot authors' unique strengths from their writing and keenly observe their traits through interactions to offer tailored writing advice. He was invited to go fishing with Hemingway several times. He discovered Hemingway was a natural hunter who could learn about underwater terrain and fish habits in just 1 year, knowledge others take decades or a lifetime to gain. Therefore, he suggested Hemingway write a story about fishing in the Gulf. Later, Hemingway actually started writing it, but it wasn't published until after Perkins' death. This is The Old Man in the Sea. To commemorate Perkins, Hemingway dedicated the book to him. Beyond his deep literary knowledge, Perkins also had sharp business sense. He knew how to perfectly align the publisher's performance with the author's career planning. He found that sales of an author's previous book could boost the next one. So after an author published a popular novel, he'd gather their published short stories into a collection. This kept the author visible and famous while boosting the publisher's sales. For example, after F. Scott Fitzgerald's debut novel This Side of Paradise became a hit, Perkins quickly compiled a short story collection, Tales of the Jazz Age, for him. This book also became Fitzgerald's masterpiece, powerfully defining America's brief, gilded jazz age. Its most famous story, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, features a protagonist born at age 80 who grows younger over time, eventually becoming an infant. This story was adapted into a film in 2008, alternatively titled The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Remarkably, when authors' careers conflicted with publisher interests, Perkins consistently sided with authors. Sometimes he upheld high literary standards by publishing niche books with little profit. Other times, to nurture emerging writers, he willingly published less mature works. Miss Rawlings published Golden Apples before writing The Yearling. Though Perkins disliked it, he recognized her as an untapped talent reservoir, so he meticulously edited and published it regardless. This helped Miss Rawlings reset mentally to begin her next book. Perkins' colleagues noted his primary interest was American literary talent, though not all authors revered him, like Sherwood Anderson, Winesburg, Ohio, who influenced Faulkner and Hemingway. After early success, Anderson stagnated creatively. At 64, he blamed Perkins.
I like you, you know that.
But when we're together, you rarely ask about my work. During those times, you showed intense interest in other authors. Others left Scribner's due to inadequate attention, complaining geniuses like Fitzgerald and Wolfe monopolized Perkins's focus. Anderson's complaints weren't baseless. Perkins did show favoritism towards certain authors. He gifted Fitzgerald a walking stick and created a limited leather-bound edition of The Great Gatsby just for him. And he greatly admired Faulkner and considered recruiting him, but refrained. Some believed Perkins feared Hemingway's jealousy, Hemingway being intensely egotistical, whose would threaten to withhold contracts and manuscripts unless Perkins joined his fishing trips, which Perkins usually did. To keep his geniuses focused on writing, Perkins solved their practical problems. The Fitzgeralds lived extravagantly their whole lives. Fitzgerald constantly advanced royalties, then wrote frantically to repay debts. Perkins always obliged Fitzgerald's requests, dozens of times, even lending personal money. Grateful, Fitzgerald offered lower royalties for The Great Gatsby as repayment. But Perkins refused. They bargained until settling on compromise terms. Wolfe often dined at Perkins' home, loud and volatile, shouting at the table. He even frightened Perkins' daughter, yet Perkins responded with patient smiles. After off time in the river, Wolfe's fame peaked, but resentment toward Perkins grew. Critics claimed Wolfe had raw talent but lacked structural skill. The organizational genius in his work belonged to Perkins, without whom Wolfe couldn't have written those books. Wolfe distanced himself from Perkins and eventually switched publishers. Mutual friends considered Wolfe ungrateful. Hemingway called him an overgrown baby. In January 1937, Wolfe formally severed ties with Perkins, but just 18 months later, Wolfe collapsed. Doctors found countless brain tumors during surgery. 3 days post-surgery, September 15th, 1938, he died. He was only 38. During Wolfe's hospitalization, Perkins wrote comforting letters and joined his family at the hospital. In his final days, Wolfe finally reconciled with Perkins. He secretly wrote back to Perkins against doctors' orders. He wrote, "No matter what happens or what's happened, I'll always think of you and miss you." Unknown to Perkins, Wolfe had once written in his diary, "Before meeting you, I never had a friend in my life." Wolfe named Perkins as his literary executor in his will. Despite Wolfe signing with another publisher, 54-year-old Perkins meticulously organized his literary estate for competitors to publish. 2 years after Wolfe's death, in December 1940, Fitzgerald, long plagued by alcoholism and debt, died of a heart attack. He was only 44. Despite early fame, Fitzgerald's later years were bleak. His wife Zelda had schizophrenia. After The Great Gatsby, his writing stalled while he struggled to fund her massive medical bills. Fitzgerald also named Perkins his executor. Zelda remained hospitalized with no income. Perkins and friends pooled money for Fitzgerald's daughter's college education. Later, Perkins even funded her wedding. On June 17, 1947, after bidding farewell to many literary friends, 63-year-old Perkins reached his own end. So many mourners attended his funeral that the church overflowed.
Some authors collapsed upon hearing the news and were hospitalized.
5 years later, Hemingway dedicated The Old Man and the Sea to Perkins in tribute. Over 30 years, Perkins redefined what it meant to be an editor. He immersed himself in authors' writing processes without imposing his will. He advised young editors, If editing Mark Twain, don't turn him into Shakespeare. He believed an author's best work came entirely from themselves. His editing and visionary insight helped forge a glorious literary era. For example, The Great Gatsby didn't sell well initially, but Perkins firmly believed it was not only Fitzgerald's finest novel, but also one of the era's greatest works. Nearly a century since Gatsby's story emerged, time has validated Perkins' vision and proven the worth of a great editor. All right, that concludes our interpretation of genius. The editor, reading notes are below the audio. Until next time.